Okay, everybody, good evening. Good evening and welcome to the second Merlin talk. This is the second in the series of guest presentations organised by the Merlin Rocket Association for members and anyone else who's interested. It follows on from Sam Brearley's excellent talk on getting it right, which is still available on the Merlin Rocket YouTube channel should you wish to watch it. It's very good, recommend it, quite frightening. Tonight's talk is with a good friend of the class, David Battye. He's a national judge and umpire, and on behalf of the Merlin Rocket Association, welcome, David.
Thank you.
You'll be familiar to many of you at recent nationals, especially those who sail on the edge. No names, you know who you are. And David will be looking at the new 21 to 24 rules, specifically the changes. Good evening, David. How are you?
Very well.
Quiet time on the water?
Yes, greetings from a wild and windy Anglesey this evening.
Excellent.
The Irish Sea is in fine form.
Excellent. Yeah, I bet. However, before David kicks off, we've got a couple of reminders from the committee. First of all, can you all turn off your videos, please? Just makes the presentation look better as we record it. Your sound will be muted centrally. Thank you. Secondly, the 2021 Nationals, as you all know, are at East Lothian Sailing Club from August the 15th to the 19th. It's a fabulous and dramatic venue with a very welcoming club. I know David's got a few words to say about that later. We currently have 37 entries, I believe, so please enter if you haven't already. It's going to be great. Thirdly, the Merlin Rocket Association. If you're not already a member, for as little as £15, you can benefit from, firstly, a professional magazine. It's the best in the business by far, and it also has some fascinating interviews. New members only area on the new website, which is imminent. I'll find out exactly by the end when that's due. We have high quality coaching sessions with Christian Birrell and his team, and fantastic racing organisation. There's also great sailing in some of the best venues in the UK. So if you want to join, if you haven't already, please join via the website or chat to a member and we'll set you up. Right, and thank you for those slides, David. So right, on to the main course. There'll be some opportunities for some questions at the end. So please, if you have any questions, use the chat button and we'll be reviewing them and bring them up at the end. Right, so on behalf of the Merlin Rocket Association, we introduce to you David Battye. What will you be concentrating on tonight then, David?
I'm going to be focusing on a very small number of rule changes that I think, in my opinion anyway, are the most relevant to Merlin Rocket sailors. Excellent.
The floor's yours.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. By way of introduction, and to give you a little agenda of what I hope to cover this evening, I'm focusing on the rule changes in the latest quadrennial, which, as you all know, came into effect on the 1st of January this year. In my opinion, there are no changes which fundamentally affect the way in which the game of sailing is played. So if you're on port tack, for example, you still need to keep clear of boats on starboard tack. And if you are a windward boat, you still need to keep clear of boats which are to leeward of you. There are, however, some significant changes. They're quite few in number, and they're the ones that I want to focus on this evening. In addition to that, there are many, dozens, possibly even hundreds of very small changes which are designed to fix known problems which have emerged over the past 4 years in the 2017 to 2020 quadrennial. Those problems have emerged over the 4-year period and have typically been handled by things like the Q&A system operated by World Sailing, or they've been fixed through the case books or the call books in case of team racing and match racing. And there are just too many of them to cover in the half-hour slot that we've really got this evening. So what I've tried to do in this session is to cherry pick my way through the changes that I believe are the most relevant to high performance dinghies like the Merlin rocket. And I want to cover changes in the rulebook that affect behavior both on the water and off the water. And I'm limiting the number to 6. And there's no particular magic behind the number of 6. It's 1 less than 7, which is, according to psychologists, the most that short-term memory can accommodate for most people. So I hope when you wake up at whatever time, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and you wonder what on earth David was rabbiting on about last night, hopefully you'll be able to remember at least some of these 6 items that I'm going to cover. Now, it could well be that you have a different opinion to me, and there are other changes that you think are even more important, in which case I'd be delighted to hear about that via the Q&A that we're going to have at the end of this, this first 30 minutes. So please use the chat box in order to raise those questions. And it's no holds barred as far as I'm concerned. Even if you want to talk about rules that haven't changed to get queries answered, I'll be delighted to try and answer those as well. So here's my agenda. Here are my 6 items. 1 new definition, sail the course. Some changes to the flags, blue, orange, and Victor. A couple of rules within part 2, which is when boats meet. Rule 16.2 has some significant changes, and also rule 18.1 and the associated definition of marked room, and in particular trying to answer the question, when does rule 18 apply, and more importantly, when does it not? So those first 4 are all things that you're likely to come across on the water. The last 2 are things that you might come across off the water. The number 5 is rule 62.1b, which is about request for redress. Some important changes there that I'd like to cover. And lastly, the relative importance of the notice of race relative to the sailing instructions, and in particular rules 5, 25.1 and appendix J. So that's the agenda. So without further ado, let's talk about the one brand new definition. A lot of the definitions have changed, but the definition sail the course is brand new, and you can see it printed in red. I'm not going to read it all out because most of you will be familiar with that wording because it exists in the rule book, in the old rule book under rule 28. And that wording, sail the course, is historically tends to be known as the string test. And if I have to paraphrase the sail the course definition, it says that a boat sails the course when it passes the string test with the various components A, B, and C, which you can see displayed here on the screen. So there's nothing much has changed there. It's just in a different place in the rule book. And consequent to that, a number of rules have changed, and they're listed on the left-hand side there. The rules simply now invoke the sail the course definition. And there are too many to go through this evening. I just want to focus on the last part, which is Appendix A, and a new scoring abbreviation, which has been added to Appendix A, which is NSC, which stands for Not Sailed of the Course. And Rule A 5.1 and 5.2, which you can see on the right-hand side of this screen, simply add the wording "sail the course." Now, the important change here is that any boat which does not sail the course is now mandated by the race committee to score that boat NSC, importantly, without a hearing. That's my underlining, without a hearing. So in the old days, if a boat didn't sail the course, the race committee would be required to raise a protest and then attend that protest with the boat that it is alleged did not sail the course. And the full protest procedure would have to be invoked. Under the new rules, that's no longer required. If the race committee, by its own observation, or by the observation of its support team, sees a boat that either misses out a mark or sails the wrong way round the course, they can now be disqualified without a hearing, and the penalty is the same as a disqualification, which is one more than the number of boats which have entered the series, as you can see in A5.2. So the key bullet points, which I've just summarised, are all listed on the left-hand side there. The race committee will act to score a boat NSC if they, from their own observation, see a boat which, for whatever reason, has not sailed the course. If you decide to rock up to the committee boat at the end of a race and report that boat number XYZ missed out Mark 1A, for example, on the triangle, then don't expect the race committee to rush to act on your behalf. The first thing that the race committee is likely to say is, are you intending to protest? Unless the race committee can corroborate from their own observations the report that you are now giving verbally, they would still expect you to protest. That's all I want to say about the first item, which is the new definition of sailing the course and the consequent addition to Appendix A of the NSC score. So the next item is about race signals. We've got a new race signal, which is the orange flag. The fact that it's new may come as a surprise to many of you, because most race officers have been using the orange flag for many, many years. The problem is that the meaning which has been ascribed by race officers to the orange flag has not had much consistency over the years, and it's developed over the years as well. Historically, the orange flag flown anywhere on the boat used to mean I am the principal race officer and this is my boat, and I'm going to be at the right-hand side of the start line. When that orange flag went up was very much a matter of the race officer's discretion. Some race officers would use it to mean that I'm on station and I've got my anchor down. Others might put it up when they've laid the line. More recently, it's probably been used as an attention signal to indicate that we're about to go into sequence, probably in 5 minutes' time. And the meaning of the orange flag, which the race officer wanted to communicate, would have to be put in the sailing instructions. You'll notice that there is no sound signal ascribed to the current new definition of the orange flag. What the orange flag means now is that the stat from which the flag is displayed is now defining one end of the starting line. When it's displayed, and whether it has a sound signal or not, is very much up to the discretion of the race officer. Now, not having if the race officer's intention is to make this an attention signal, not having a sound signal, in my opinion, is not a very good idea. So probably the race officer would need to amend the definition of the race signal to indicate that they will be making a sound signal. But one thing you can be sure of now is that wherever the flag is flown from, that will now be one end of the starting line. Now, the blue flag was in the race signals in the old quadrennial, and simply meant that the boat displaying it was a finishing vessel. What it is now changed to mean that the blue flag is at one end of the finishing line. And again, when the blue flag goes up, there is again no requirement for a sound signal. So there's really not much change there, except that you can be sure that wherever the flag is flown from is definitely one end of the finishing line. Now, in addition to those two, there is a third new flag, which is flag Victor. Flag Victor has been used in some parts of the world. I've never seen it used personally in the UK, but it's a search and rescue instruction. So basically, when flag Victor goes up with a long sound signal, basically this means that the event is basically out of control. Probably all the races have long since been abandoned and we're in search and rescue mode. If you see flag Victor, this is basically an instruction to head for home. And if you're in a support vessel, it's an instruction to mount a search and rescue operation from your boat. Okay, so that's number two. Number three is probably gets more interesting because we're now into the part two of the rule book, which is when boats meet. And rule 16.2 has been quite significantly changed. And I'll just focus on the changes on the right-hand side of this chart, first of all. So the words that have got, well, the words in red with a line through it are words that have been deleted from the old version of the rule. So after the starting signal has been deleted and been replaced by on a beat to windward. The word astern has been deleted and replaced by to leeward. And then the last part of the rule has been changed, but it's basically a syntax change to give the word immediately maybe slightly more prominence. So how has the rule been changed? Well, if you look at the diagram, you'll see rule 16.2 in operation. So we have yellow on starboard, and we've got blue on port. And in about 4 boat lengths time on their current courses, they are potentially on collision course. Blue, at position 1, blue decides they're not sufficiently far advanced to be able to confidently cross ahead of and to windward of yellow. And so at position 2, blue starts to bear away. And it's at position 2 that rule 16.2 is triggered. because now at position 2, blue will now pass to leeward rather than to windward of yellow. And that now means, from yellow's point of view, that from position 2, 16.2 is on. And if yellow, after position 2, bears away, which will then force blue to bear away even more to continue keeping clear, yellow will have broken rule 16.2 and will receive a penalty if this goes to a protest. Thinking about when this rule might happen on the race course, it probably doesn't happen very often. It's much more common to see this in match racing or team racing situations. But one place it might happen in a fleet race, if blue and yellow are approaching Mark 1, the windward mark, in a typical sausage triangle situation, and yellow is on the ley line or thereabouts, but in a shifting wind. Yellow may want, when yellow gets a lift, she may want to hang on to that lift so that she's pointing maybe a couple of boat lengths above the mark, which might then encourage blue to think there's going to be a gap. Blue's coming in on the port ley line on the mark. Yellow might shout something like, "Don't go in there." But once yellow starts to bear away, once blue starts to bear away, yellow needs to be careful. If she then closes the gap and now, instead of pointing 2 boat lengths above the mark, now points at the mark while blue is bearing away, she runs the risk of breaking 16.2. The safe thing to do for yellow is to wait until blue is clearly sailing to past astern of yellow, in which case there will be no further need for blue to bear away. That would avoid yellow breaking 16.2. Now, just going back to the definition, you will see that the words after the starting signal have been deleted from the rule. So that raises the question then, does 16.2 apply before the starting signal? And to answer that question, we need to go to a world sailing case, a world sailing case 132, which is summarized here on this chart. And you can see effectively what we've got here is an interpretation of the phrase on a beat to windward, which was, as you saw, has been added to the rule. And the definition of when boats are on a beat to windward is when the proper course for each of them would be to be sailing close hold or above. Because there is no proper course before the start, the boats in the pre-start are not on a beat to windward, and therefore rule 16.2 continues not to apply, which was the situation with the old rule before the start. That's all I want to say about rule 16.2. So we're halfway through our list of 6. The fourth one is rule 18.1 and the associated definition of mark room. Again, the words in red here show the additions to the definition and to the rule. The mark room B has added the words to pass and to sail the course without touching the mark. Those are relatively small changes. Rule 18.1 has had the phrase Rule 18 no longer applies when mark room has been given. There was a technical problem with the old rule 18.1. the old rule only turned off part of Rule 18. It turned off Rule 18.2, but not, sorry, 18.2b, but it didn't turn off 18.2a, which meant that under certain rather unusual conditions, the right to mark room could be reversed, which was never the intention of the Racing Rules Committee. So let's look at a couple of examples which attempt to answer this question: when has mark room been given? If we look at the left-hand diagram, first of all, at position 1, we see that blue is inside overlapped and is therefore entitled to mark room. And she sails to the mark without altering course, and yellow, which is the boat required to give mark room and also to keep clear, and she fulfills both those obligations. At position 4, blue rounds the mark wide, which leaves a gap, and yellow goes into that gap. At position 5, the mark is astern of blue's transom, which means that Rule 18 is now off because mark room has been given. So if blue were now to jibe onto port and luff in order to try and belatedly close the door, she would not get protection from the exoneration, which would be provided when she was entitled to mark room. If by making that jibe and luff, she forced yellow to hit the mark, blue would attract the penalty. So the question then is, well, is that the test? That when mark room has been given, it happens when the mark is astern of the boat which is entitled to mark room. And the answer to that question is no, that's not always the case. If we look at the right-hand diagram, we see an example where blue, in this case, is clear ahead of yellow at position 1. So blue again is the boat which is entitled to mark room under Rule 18.2b. But she sails a wide rounding, and by the time she gets to position 4, she's left sufficient room for yellow to put her nose in there. And at that stage, yellow is pointing in the direction of the next mark. So again, the question is, what would happen if blue luffed after position 4 and closed the door on yellow and forced her to hit the mark? And you get the same answer, is that blue would not receive any protection from her exoneration because the mark, she's been given the mark room, which was required for her to round the mark as necessary to sail the course. So the answer to the question when mark room has been given needs to be viewed on a case-by-case basis. It's not simply a question of when she's actually sailed past the mark. This is a contentious rule, and the Racing Rules Committee and the Working Party have withdrawn a case with a diagram in it which looks very similar to my right-hand diagram, as they try and wrestle with the wording to find a general statement which is universally true as to when mark room has been given. So far, they've failed to find that wording. So watch this space. I think you can expect more cases and probably more Q&As on Rule 18, which is still pretty much a troublesome rule in the book. Okay, so that's number 4 finished. So we're now on to a situation which now is likely to happen both on and off the water, and concerns the question of redress. And Rule 62. Again, Rule 62 is a complicated rule, and it's listed in full on the right there. When you seek redress as a result of injury or physical damage by a boat that was breaking a rule of Part 2, you have a number of hoops you need to jump through. Some of these hoops existed in the old rule book, and they're color coded here. So there's a blue hoop that you need to jump through, which is that you need to demonstrate that your score or place in the series has been or may be made significantly worse through the action of this boat that was breaking a part of a rule of Part 2. The second hoop you need to jump through is the green hoop, which you need to demonstrate that you are fault-free. In other words, you have not contributed to your own downfall. And then the third hoop is in this case the black hoop, because injury or physical damage, etc., is one of 4 possible reasons why you might seek redress. The other 3, which are listed as A, which is an improper action or omission by the race committee, C, which is giving help, or D, which is action resulting from a boat breaking Rule 2, the fair sailing rule, or Rule 69, the misconduct rule. Those 3 elements, A, C, and D, haven't changed. What has been changed is B, which now has the words "and took an appropriate penalty or was penalised." They're the important words. So in other words, there's a 4th additional hoop that you need to jump through. So let's go to the left-hand side of the slide and look at a cautionary tale about 2 Merlin rockets, A and B, which have a collision. Let's imagine for a moment that A is on port and B is on starboard, and there is a port and starboard incident, and as a result of it, B is damaged. At the time of the incident, there is no call of protest and no boat takes a penalty. It turns out that A and B are mates. They're both members of the same club. They've been members of this years.
Automatically, I'm thinking it's either going to be a letter.
Somebody has got their mic turned on. I don't know who it is, but if you could just check your mics, that would be helpful. At the time of the incident, A holds their hand up and shouts, "My fault. Sorry, I'll pay for any damage," and pauses for a moment. B sails on and finishes the race ahead of A. A also finishes the race. When they get ashore, B realizes that the damage is more serious than they thought and needs to effect repairs, which are going to take 24 hours. And as a result of that, this is a national championship, and it means that B is going to miss the next race on the following day while repairs are being effected. So B decides to seek redress. And she jumps through all the hoops that we've talked about. She jumps through the blue hoop because her score is going to be made worse, because she's going to get a DNC score, which means that she'll, for the next day's race, she was not at fault. She continued to sail the previous race. So she did everything that she could. But when the protest committee find out what happened at the incident, they discover that that A did not take any penalty turns under Rule 44.2, and B didn't call protest. So they explain that unfortunately they're unable to grant redress because of these new red words which now appear in the rule book: took an appropriate penalty, which he didn't do, or was penalised. And she wasn't penalised because nobody's protested. So B then considers that says she would like to raise a protest. So she files a protest, and the protest committee then have to do a validity test, and they will inquire, well, what did you do at the time of the incident? And the answer was, we didn't do anything in the sense of using the word protest. So regrettably, the protest committee will then say to B, I'm sorry, your protest is invalid. We can't hear it. And the only possibility then is for B to go back to A and ask her to retire. If she does, then the protest committee can reopen the request for redress. But if she refuses for whatever reason, then unfortunately, under the new rules, B is not going to be able to get any redress for this damage. A cautionary tale. The moral of this story is that whenever you're involved in an incident, even if you think there's no doubt about the possibility of damage, it's always wise to use the word protest, even if this is your best mate who you've known for years. Okay, last one at 8:10. There are a couple of changes here which make the notice of race much more significant than it ever used to be relative to the sailing instructions. The notice of race is now required to be made available to every boat before it enters the event. And the sailing instructions are unchanged. They've got to be available before a race begins. The important change is in Appendix J, which says that a rule in the notice of race need not be repeated in the sailing instructions. So as an example where this might cause difficulty, let's imagine that in a regatta, in an event, the race committee decide that rather than use Rule 26 to start the races, which is a 5-4-1 go starting sequence, they decide they would prefer to use a 3-2-1 go starting sequence. And that change is notified in the notice of race. There's no requirement now to repeat that in the sailing instructions. So if you have conscientiously read the sailing instructions, you might therefore assume that by default Rule 26 will apply to start the races, and you will be wondering why after a couple of minutes in the starting sequence the rest of the fleet is sailing away and you're still in the middle of your pre-start sequence. It's a pretty unlikely event, I have to say, at a major regatta, but the important thing here is that not reading the notice of race now might put you at a significant disadvantage if there are major rule changes in there, which, as I say, because of Appendix J, need not be repeated. So there you have it, 6 items. This slide is a reminder of all the other things we might have talked about in the first half hour. There are many of the definitions that have changed. In my opinion, they're all less important than the ones that we've talked about, and there are lots of other rule changes, 43 to 20.4, rules 3 and 4 being reversed. You may want to raise those in questions, but I'm going to stop there now and give you a chance to ask questions. I'm going to take these slides down for a moment while Ben brings me in and just see if there are any significant questions. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, David. That's a very concise explanation of some very complicated rules there. Glad there are only 6 main ones to look at. I know there are some other ones, but they definitely seem the key ones. I don't know if anyone's got any questions yet. I've certainly got one. I'm just going to move that out of the way. First of all, the 16.2, keep what used to be the sort of keeping clear. There seems to be now a shift that, for example, if that starboard yellow yacht hadn't seen the blue boat on port and got a wind shift and bore away slightly, the blue boat could then argue the rule 16.2 change. Now, in the old days, you'd say, well, I have a blue boat, I'm going to keep clear boat, I'm going to make my decision early and keep out the way. So there's some ambiguity there now that there might be a case to argue in a protest, even though the yellow boat hadn't seen you. Does that make sense?
Yes. The important thing here is to consider the relative importance of Rule 16.2 versus 16.1. The purpose of Rule 16.2 is to prevent boats dialing down and approaching each other, accelerating from a beat onto a beam reach and planing into each other at high speed. The important thing here is that ultimately it'll be Rule 16.1 which takes over as the boats get to within 2 boat lengths of each other. The starboard boat, if it alters course, will need to give the port tack boat room to keep clear. Now, the important thing here is that we're talking about the alteration of the compass course here, not the proper course. So if there is a wind shift as the boats are approaching each other and the starboard boat alters course, let's say that this is a header and the starboard boat bears away in response to that header, that's an alteration of course, an alteration of a compass course. And in doing so, she needs to give the port tack boat room to keep clear. And if she makes that alteration of course by a bear away when the boats are 2 boat lengths apart, it doesn't give the port tack boat much room to do anything. If she tries to do a crash tack, she's probably going to get in the way, and it's probably too late for her to bear away. Now, the intention of Rule 16.2 is to try and preempt that situation by, typically it will come into play in dinghies when boats are around 6, 7, 8 boat lengths apart. And under those circumstances, the intention is that once it's clear that the blue boat on port tack starts to alter course, it's a signal that the yellow boat should not bear away again.
I guess it's if it came to it, the port boat would still have to prove that the yellow boat bore away. It's still
yes.
there.
Yeah, and that would be very difficult to do without a third-party witness.
Yeah. So in America's Cup, when you've got TV and everything, that's fine. But in a normal everyday competition, the onus is on you to still keep clear unless there was an incident.
Yeah. In all my judging career of about 12, 13 years, I've never penalised a boat on the water in a fleet race for breaking 16.2. it's much more likely, because the boat that's breaking 16.2 is probably later on is going to break 16.1 as well, because that'll be, as the boats continue to approach each other, that will become clear when it's impossible for the blue boat to do anything to avoid contact. It's much more likely that the penalty will be on 16.1. The only time I've ever penalised boats under 16.2 is in a team racing situation where, or a match racing situation where the dial down is much more common.
Cool. Thank you for that, David. We've got a question. I can't see who it's from actually, but it says, great presentation. However, not relating to the rule changes, but in relation to pumping, if you get a gust in light wind, do you have to level the boat immediately, or can you take a bit of time before righting and therefore give yourself a bit of an ooch? It's from the chairman, Chris. Obviously, you're aware of him at the front of the fleet.
There is no rule that requires you to right a boat immediately. The word ooch there is, the problem is the word ooch is a defined term in the Rule 42, and ooching refers to moving your body fore and aft in the boat, and I don't think that's what is meant by Chris in this. I think he's talking about sitting the boat out, moving the body athwart ships rather than fore and aft. So if that's what he means by the ooch, by leveling the boat, by hiking the boat flat, there is no requirement to do that immediately. If, on the other hand, by ooch he means moving your weight forward and then stopping abruptly, and then if that is repeated, it will break Rule 42.
Well,
I don't know whether Chris wants to unmute his mic and clarify.
Yeah, that is what I meant in terms of just moving your body weight out, but maybe doing it in a bit of a delayed fashion so that you maybe get a little bit from that.
I mean, there could be lots of good reasons why you wanted to delay it. I mean, if your head's in the boat and you're adjusting a control line, for example, that would be a good reason for that delay. I'm assuming that there's no change of course in the situation you're envisaging, Chris. The main reason why boats break Rule 42 when there's a delay is when you're coming out of attack. If you are rolling the boat to go into attack and you come down to close hold on the new tack, and then you delay before pulling the boat upright, and you then accelerate the boat, that will definitely break Rule 42. But if there is no change of course, and this is a gust in light winds, as you're sailing on a continuous straight line course, then in the way you've asked the question, you will not break the rule if you delay the bringing the boat upright.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions from anybody? I've just got another quick one. Notice of race. Obviously that now is a very important document. Is there any time before an event that needs to be available to competitors, or just immediately before the event?
No, it needs to be available from the time the entry form is available. So if we think about the nationals at North Berwick this year, the entry form is now open. The notice of race is published. The notice of race is a contract between the organising authority, in this case the Merlin Rocket Owners Association, in conjunction with ELYC, and the competitors, which is you basically. The notice of race needs to include anything which might influence your decision whether or not to enter the event.
Yeah.
And if for whatever reason the notice of race is not available when you enter, but you decide to enter anyway, and then when the notice of race is published, you find something in there that is not to your liking, then you are reasonably entitled to ask for your money back.
Cool. So basically, you have the notice of race ready as soon as you publicise the event. As soon as you open.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Anybody? Any last questions? Anybody? I think that's given plenty of food for thought for everybody, David. I think we'll go back and have a look at those definitions and a bit more clarity and try and work through some situations. Thank you very much for your excellent insight, for your time this evening. It's much appreciated. We look forward to seeing you on the water. Are you going to the Nationals for this year? I'm
hoping to be on the water as long as we get enough entries to justify my boat being on the water.
Cool.
So anybody who's listening who's not yet entered, I was at North Berwick a couple of years back for the RS Aero Nationals, and I can thoroughly recommend it as an excellent club, excellent water, and great Scottish hospitality.
Yep. I'm sure that's the case. So it's much appreciated. Just as a reminder for the next one, the next Merlin chat will be our good friend Alex Warren of Warren Therapy and Fitness. We're doing a talk on Get Fit for Sailing. There's not a lot he has to tell us about that, I guess, which is on the Thursday, the 1st of April. So please put that in your diaries. Finally, thank you all for joining in at home, and hopefully see you on the water very soon. So good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, David.